and welcome to a podcast in space and time. I'm Holden B. Huffman, and this is
Kendal Coffee.
And we decided we are longtime Doctor Who fans. Okay, maybe not long time. I've been a fan since 2013. No, 2012, late 2012. I started watching late 2012, right when something happened. I don't want to get into that because spoilers. But yeah, we're longtime Doctor Who fans, and we're just like, we have so much to say about Doctor Who. It means so much to us. We want to start a podcast about it and just explain to people why it means so much to us, and hopefully you guys will enjoy it.
Yeah, so I got into it slightly before Holden did. I actually kind of introduced him to the show, but I've hopped on about partway through 11's run and been kind of on board ever since. Mm-hmm. Mostly with the new Who. I'm not as familiar with the old Who, but Holden's going to be more familiar with that stuff.
Yeah, I've not seen all of old Who. It's so hard to find and get a track. Not really hard to find, but they're expensive. They're very expensive to get a full story set. They're very expensive. So I've just found what I can here and there, and I've watched what I can. I've at least seen episode stories with every Doctor, so I know a little bit background of every Doctor. And everything. So yeah, let's get started with series 1, episode 1, Rose. And welcome back. We just finished watching the episode. That's basically what we're going to be doing for this podcast, is watch the episode and then talk about our thoughts about it, because we love the show so much.
Yeah. Let's. How about you go first, and okay. I'll kind of like jump in as I have thoughts.
Okay, and also, just for everyone's knowledge, the reason Kendal's microphone isn't all that great is because he's using his laptop's microphone. I'm using my Blue Yeti, but his microphone is just his laptop microphone, because right now we're currently going through the home quarantine of COVID-19. So as of right now, we're not being able to do this together, but once all this is over with, we're actually going to do this together. So Kendal's audio will get better later on.
I will sound better later. Yeah. I mean, I sound great now.
But I mean, you do, but your voice will sound more crisp. Your voice will sound more crisp.
You'll really capture my dulcet tones a little better.
Ooh, shivers.
All right.
And, my first note really was just that I love the corniness and the campiness of the early 2000s.
Oh, it's so like,
I miss it.
It's unabashedly like early 2000s sci-fi. Mm-hmm. And obviously at the time they weren't doing that intentionally. It's just the way it was, but it's just so wonderfully within that era.
Mm-hmm. You know, it totally is. Like I was born in 97, so I definitely grew up in the whole 2000s era of like Ben 10, Fairly Odd Parents, Jimmy Neutron, stuff like that. Yeah. Like that's my generation of things.
Oh yeah, same. I mean, I'm a couple of years ahead of you, but yeah, like
you're like 2.5 years older than me.
Yeah, I feel like there's almost a compulsion these days for shows to try to kind of like be a little bit timeless, where they don't. I mean, they will reference like current events, but like as far as the style itself goes, you know, maybe they won't use like music that's going to be dated, or like sets that are going to be dated within like a couple years. But that definitely was not the attitude of this show at the time. They like definitely were not really thinking like, oh, in a few years this is going to be really dated. And I kind of love that. I kind of love.
Yeah, no, it's great.
I love to see something where you can just like place it in time so easily.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and also something I meant to mention before we started getting into this is that we're going to have a section where we talk about just this episode, nothing else. And then we're going to have a section with spoilers for the rest of the series. We're completely caught up. Series 12 just ended a little over a month ago. So we're going to talk about some of the implications of how this goes to that and how this applies to that. But for the first 15 minutes or so, we're just going to talk about this episode in particular.
Yeah, we'll let you know when the spoilers are about to start.
Right. Okay, you want to go next? That was my first note.
Yeah, I think like sort of branching off that same idea, I've really appreciated how the monsters in this episode were really in that like kind of uncanny valley territory. I feel like that's something that is also missing with newer shows. You don't really have villains who just feel kind of so odd and strange and
Mm-hmm.
like you know like uh,
Yeah,
I feel
yeah.
like they were trying to do something similar with the Weeping Angels later, and I don't really think that's a spoiler, but
Not
like
every, literally, most people I know who've not seen Doctor Who know about Weeping Angels.
yeah, so I think they were trying to do something similar, but there's something about the plasticky,
Mm-hmm.
you know, like there's something about the way the monsters are created in this episode that it works so well. Obviously, some of it didn't age very well with like the CGI, but as far
Mm-hmm.
as like the costumes themselves, the monsters themselves, they look really good, and they
Oh, they
really
did. They did.
feel like what they're supposed to be. They feel like these
Mm-hmm.
weird, wrong things.
Right. And I mean, it was good for the time period as well. I mean,
Oh yeah,
that's like with Star Wars. You got to walk into the first few Star Wars of this is good. This might, if this were to come out in this era today, brand new, it would suck. You got to walk into it as like this was amazing breakthrough technology for that time period.
yeah, and I mean, like even I don't even know that Star Wars is a great example of that because a lot of those effects hold up still.
Well, they do, but I just that was the first thing I thought of.
No, I get you. Like, I mean, obviously, some of the creatures are, you can tell this is
Mm-hmm.
claymation. This is
Right.
the puppet, but like, there's something about, um, yeah, just like comparing like CGI Yoda to puppet Yoda.
Right.
There's something about puppet Yoda that feels more alive in a weird way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I totally get you. And like the fact that they brought in Puppet Yoda for The Last Jedi instead of CGI Yoda was great.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that. But yeah, I mean, going back to this, I think they were kind of going for like the opposite effect, obviously. Like they wanted it to feel like sort of the creepiness of a mannequin, but they really
Mm-hmm.
pulled it off.
And
I
speaking
think
of
it worked
which,
really well.
they're called the Autons, and they were actually this isn't their first episode. They're actually from classic Doctor Who.
Hmm.
Um, their first episode was actually John Pertwee's first episode as the Third Doctor in Spearheads from Space. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I was like
mhm.
vaguely familiar with that fact, but I don't really know too much
Right.
about Old Who.
I mean, you know, the Daleks and the Cybermen were in Old Who.
Yeah, like there are
Right.
certain villains that are obviously long recurring villains.
Mm-hmm.
Daleks especially and Cybermen, they've both been around a
Mm-hmm.
long time. But there are certain villains that New Who kind of brings in that like, maybe you saw them in Old Who like once or twice.
Right. Right. But not many times. Like you maybe saw them for a couple of. Right. But
Yeah, and
yeah. Sorry.
I
Go
think
ahead.
I think that's one thing New Who does well as well is like they'll bring in classic villains, but they'll introduce them in a way that you don't really need to know them
Right.
beforehand.
Right.
Like I think it as a viewer of only New Who and not much Old Who, I think it seems to do a good job of like both being for the new and the old fans. I can't really speak for
Mm-hmm.
the old fans, but there have been very few times where a villain has popped up where I needed to know like, oh, they were in episode whatever of
Mm-hmm.
an episode 30, 40 years ago.
Right. No, they're very good at doing that. Of like they'll throw in implications of like if you've seen the old show, you'll understand. But if you are a new time watcher, you're like, oh, okay, this alien, it does that, blah blah blah.
Yeah, and um, I think too that it really adds a lot to the Doctor, and I think the Doctor is very fascinating in that way. In that both
Mm-hmm.
the Doctor is a very old character, like the character has been around for a long time, but also
Mm-hmm.
like the Doctor as a person is very old and has all this history, and both of those things kind
Right.
of work really well together to add this like rich tapestry to who the Doctor is, and I think that's really cool.
Mhm. Right. And my next note was just that I think this episode is just a great way to start the revived era. And like, especially since they start focusing on the humans, they focus on Rose to begin with, to kind of bring us into the role of sci-fi. Like, you start off with something familiar and then bring in the something strange and new
Yeah,
going through it.
it's very hero's journey-esque, where
Mm-hmm.
you have this person from a setting that's going to be really familiar to the audience, and
Mm-hmm.
then like you bring them into this wider world of
Right.
something bigger than themselves.
And kind of like the first 2007 Transformers movie, which is really the only reason. Well, that's a whole nother topic, but that's the only reason I see it holds up as a good movie, because it's an introduction to that world.
Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, I think too, like as an introduction to the Doctor, I think it's really interesting. We really don't see much of the Doctor until like maybe 15 minutes in, right? Like
Mm-hmm. Right.
we and we see the Doctor. He's there for a minute when Rose is initially attacked by
Mm-hmm. The Autons.
the Autons. Sorry, I keep forgetting their
No,
names.
you're fine. You're fine.
We see him for a minute, and like obviously they do their running and he does his doctory sonic-y thing, but then he's just like gone again, and
Mm-hmm.
he's like this mysterious
Right.
presence that has like
Mm-hmm.
kind of passed through Rose's life for just a moment, and
Mm-hmm. And then he comes back for a moment again, and then vanishes altogether again.
yeah, I love the mystery enshrouding the Doctor in this
Mm-hmm.
episode. I think it's a really nice a nice
Mm-hmm.
touch.
Oh, it really is. And also I just love Nine's sass, Christopher Eccleston's sass.
Oh, he's so good at like he's sassy, but in a way that's like really charming. Like
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't come across as um
Rude and
right. Yeah, like I mean, it is kind
mm-hmm.
of rude. Like he's obviously being rude, but
Oh yeah, but it's
it
a
doesn't like
likable sass.
yeah. He's got like the charisma and charm to kind of make
Mm-hmm.
it likable.
Mm-hmm. And actually, in an interview, Christopher Eccleston said if he were to go back and do it again, what would he change? He said he would change the humor. Like, he wasn't a big fan of how he did the comedy bits, which I disagree with. I love it.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoy his style of comedy and his sass, and it's fun to me.
Mm-hmm. And just, he's not even looking for a companion. Like he just sees Rose, walks away, sees Rose again, walks away, and leaves. Because like he's not looking for a companion right now. Like, in
Yeah.
Old Who, he's had companions, and well, I don't want to say anything because that's getting into spoiler territory right now. So
Right, but like obviously in this episode he's been through something, and we can see that in his mannerisms and like just
mm-hmm.
the way he like interacts with Rose. Like he's obviously been through something. But I did notice like and I don't know if this is well, this might get into spoiler territory. I might save that point actually.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll just go on to my next thing. How does Clive know all this stuff about the Doctor? Like,
I was really
I want to
interested.
know Clive's story, how he came to discover all these things and knows this much about them.
Yeah, because like I mean, obviously the sort of like conspiracy theorist
Mm-hmm.
character is like we've seen that a lot in media, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I found it really interesting that he had all this information he kind of like dug up really deeply. Like obviously he spends a lot of time on this, and like the Doctor has almost like become his life, even though he's literally never met him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was kind of fascinated by Clyde's character.
Mm-hmm. Is it Clive or Clyde?
I'm not sure. I didn't quite catch it. It's one of the two.
Yeah.
We're never going to see him again, so like it probably doesn't matter. Sorry, Clive.
Not unless he just shows up in series 13 for no reason.
I would kind of love it, honestly. Like Clive just pops back up, and the doctor's like, "Wait, I know you."
Well, actually, no. The doctor, I don't think ever met Clive.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, it was just Rose that met Clive.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let's see. This is like a sort of unrelated point, but I really appreciated Mickey's plastic makeup.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It was very good. Like just the way they were able to make real Mickey look like plastic Mickey. A lot of people like, it's a meme now. People make fun of it, but like as far as makeup work goes, it was kind of impressive.
Yeah,
like,
it really is. Like you make someone look like a fake version of themselves.
Yeah, that's like there's got to be a trick to that, and like it's obviously hilarious to see on screen, but like that's what it was meant to look like. It was supposed to look like a fake, like Kendal version of Mickey. So like they pulled it off.
Absolutely. Right, and I love that he's actually wearing a wig.
Yeah, yeah. I really appreciated just like the whole plastic Mickey bit was very good.
No, that's spoiler.
I really enjoyed the TARDIS reveal. Just like her, like looking at it, like, are we really gonna get into this thing? And then like she goes in and sees the inside, and that like look on her face, like, oh my god, it's bigger on the inside,
right?
And then she goes back out and runs around it, and like, oh, it was just very good. It was a very good like sequence of just that whole sequence was very fun.
All right. Okay, I've really only got one more thing I can talk about, and then we get into spoiler territory.
Okay, go for it.
That there's a rumor, when Nine first leaves Rose, like she says, no, I'm not coming with you. And the doctor's like, oh, okay. And then he leaves, but he comes back. There's a rumor, like a fan theory or something, that he actually went and did a ton of things in between that time. Because he's a time traveler. He could have just come right back, like he went and did stuff, like years of it. And he's like, oh gosh, I never told her it was a time machine. And so he goes back.
That seems like a very doctor-y thing to do too.
Right.
Like just, have this thought like years later where you're like, oh, well, I should have told her that.
Right. And like, they do the audio adventures things and stuff. That would be a great point to do some, like if Christopher Eccleston would ever come back as the Doctor, which he's starting to come back to it more and more. He started doing cons for it now.
Yeah.
So that would be a good place to do some stuff with him, to have more of them.
That would be fun.
That point.
So my last non-spoiler thing I wanted to talk about was just like, we were talking about the campiness of the episode earlier, but like I just really appreciated that the London Eye was a giant radio transmitter. That's so good.
Right? Like next Big Ben's going to be a laser or something.
Right? It's got that kind of like, oh, it's so good. And it's like, it's one of those things that you only get in a very particular type of show. Like just the absolute like unabashed campiness of like, it's a giant radio transmitter. Like, sure, why not? Like I feel it's like one of those spaghetti thrown at the wall kind of solutions to like, okay, we need a giant radio transmitter in this episode. What should it be?
How about the London Eye?
Why not? Like, yeah.
Walks in like, sorry, I'm late. There was a ton of traffic at the London Eye. That's perfect.
It's very good. Okay, so let's get into spoiler talk then.
Spoiler warning.
Okay. I can't believe Rose just died. Wow.
Yeah, it's incredible. Like she dies in her very first episode, and the episode's even called Rose. Like, what the heck?
Yeah, and then they just like kill her episode 1, and then again in episode 2, and like episode 3 they kill her again.
It's like South Park.
It's like Rory.
I wasn't going to say spoilers, but no, we're in the spoiler section.
We're in the spoiler zone. I'm starting with a banger.
Okay, my first real spoiler Is
Okay.
this is the first time Nine sees his face. This is the first time he sees his face
Yeah.
post Time War.
Right.
And like that got me thinking of like, well, if this is the first time seeing his face, this is very recent of him regenerating from the Time War. He just regenerated. So that means he couldn't have been the Doctor to have fought in the Time War, like a lot of people thought. And it's just like, well, Eccleston wouldn't come back for the 50th anniversary, so they just got someone else.
No, I mean, it definitely seemed like, just watching it in hindsight, it seemed like they intended for 8 to be the Time War Doctor and like 9 to be a very recent regeneration. Because early in the episode when he's at Rose and Jackie's house, he like looks in the mirror and kind of makes a comment on his appearance. And it seems like this is the first time he's seeing this face for sure. Yeah, I also noticed, this is the spoiler I was going to talk about earlier, but I decided not to. I noticed that he tells Rose just to forget him and like go live her life.
Yeah.
And we've seen like with later Doctors, like the Doctor can literally make you forget.
Right, with Donna, and then almost with Bill, but Bill convinces him not to.
Right, yeah. And I'm wondering, was this an old Who thing where the Doctor could make people forget, or...
I really don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not that versatile in old Who.
Okay, because like the Doctor could have made her forget, I guess is the point I'm trying to make. He could have made her forget, but he didn't. And I'm wondering if like there was some part of him that was wanting her to remember him and wanting her to follow him. Because I mean, like, that's, the Doctor has been through the Time War, but it's almost got to be like this deep-seated instinct within him to want that companionship, to want somebody traveling by his side. And I wonder, like, yeah, did he really want her to come with him, even though he said like, forget me, even though he said go away? Was that like, in a way, was that him actually saying like, or maybe don't, don't. And like, if she were to follow him, then he would know like she's the right person for this.
Also, my next spoiler was just, we talked about the aged TARDIS, of how the TARDIS looks completely aged from what John Hurt's TARDIS was during the Time War. Like, it's the same thing, but just you can tell it's like gotten dusty and old. And
definitely like the props and set department did a fantastic job with this TARDIS. It looks like a TARDIS that has been through a war. Like it really has that. Just like even the bronziness of it, the paneling,
right?
It looks sort of like cobbled together a little bit, just battle worn, and like it's been through hell and back,
Yeah.
And I really appreciate that like attention to detail. I think it's really nice.
Oh yeah, it's very nice.
I do think it's more of a TARDIS that fits 9 than 10, and like I understand, with the show's budget constraints, they probably couldn't completely rebuild the TARDIS interior, but
right, and plus it was just one season of Eccleston, and they're like, we literally just built this like 9 months ago.
Yeah, it would have been really difficult to, build a whole new TARDIS to fit 10, but I definitely feel like, it definitely was a TARDIS that fit 9 more.
Yeah, it definitely did. Oh, I forgot to mention this in my non-spoilers, but just I'm very thankful they actually explained the northern accent thing. Like, why do you sound like you're from the north? Because every planet has a north.
Lots of planets have a north is one of my favorite jokes from this entire season. It's so good. It's like it's such an obvious explanation, and it's just so doctory to say, and so 9 specifically, but it's like, of course I'm from the north. I'm from the north of Gallifrey.
Right. I mean, of course he becomes Scottish later, but
yeah, he's from Scottish Gallifrey, or Gallifrey, Scotland. the Scottish part of Gallifrey.
Mm-hmm. And also just the doctor not even considering that Mickey might be dead. Like, that's
Yeah,
very post-Time War, still trying to remember what it is. Not that he's human, but to be human.
to be the Doctor, yeah.
Right, to be
Because
the doctor.
I don't think they necessarily had this specifically in mind, but like during the Time War, the Doctor literally shed his
Mm-hmm.
doctorness. Like he shed the name. He knew that like
He became he became a warrior.
yeah, he had to accept that like I'm not the Doctor anymore. I can't be through this. Like
Mm-hmm.
of course, we find out later he was wrong, but to
Mm-hmm.
him, like he was not the Doctor anymore. He couldn't
Right.
save the people that he wanted to save.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the weight of all of that you could really feel in this episode.
Oh, definitely.
You
And
could,
you're going to definitely feel it in what I think the next episode, The End of the World.
yeah,
You feel it a lot more there, in my opinion.
yeah. But even so, like even in the little amounts of it here are
Mm-hmm.
so effective. You
Mm-hmm.
can really feel that the Doctor has been through something really difficult and been alone for a while, and that shows very well in Eccleston's acting, and it's so subtle but it's so effective.
It is. And like when he approaches the nesting consciousness and everything, and when the consciousness sees the TARDIS, Nine just gets so much guilt on his face. He's sorry, he's apologizing for the Time War and that he couldn't help it, that it was the only way.
Yeah, it's I mean, I don't think people think of this this series as being like subtle and being really kind of nuanced, but I definitely think there's a lot more of that than maybe some people give it credit for. Like there's some
definitely.
very, like obviously there's some very campy moments and some very over the top moments, but there's also some very genuinely genuinely like subtle moments of
even in the new episodes of Doctor Who.
Yeah,
there's some campy stuff, but then there's just some deep rooted things you feel because you've experienced it with the Doctor.
Yeah, for sure. And I think obviously there are episodes that balance that better than others, but I think it's definitely been a thing all throughout New Who is really like finding time for like the wacky sci-fi antics, but also like the deeper side of the Doctor and the Doctor's story.
Definitely. And my next thing, and actually, no, this isn't my last one, but the whole thing, the whole nesting consciousness, the Autons and everything attacking, there's a rumor that that's where Clara Oswald's mother died, was during all that chaos. Because in not the Bells of St. John, but the Rings of Akatan, you see 11 go back through time and see Clara growing up in the beginning of the episode. And then you see a gravestone, and the date of death is the same day as this episode's release.
Huh, interesting. I wonder, that would be a wild thing for Clara to know. Like, I wonder if she knew how, like, no, right? Because of what happens with 11 later, they kind of like erase all the old history, so she wouldn't have known.
Right.
Yeah, she would not have known that that's like how her mother died, by being killed by some plastic people.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And do you have anything else?
That's all I've got.
Okay, I've got one last thing.
Okay.
Just that when he's asking Rose to travel with him, he's so awkward about it, and it's cute in a way. Like it's like a little boy asking a girl he has a crush on, or just if he can hold her books or something, carry her books for her. It's just so cute and sweet.
Yeah, it's such a good moment of acting for Eccleston, and I think that it feels very genuine, and I feel like genuine awkwardness is kind of hard to come across when you're acting. You probably
Right.
know more about that than I do, but
It
like,
really is. It really is.
like it's easy to.
Right. Just for people to know, I'm a stage actor, so
Yeah.
I know about acting and everything.
Yeah, like it's really easy to like be a bad actor and act awkward, like just
It
but
really is.
to be a character who is being awkward, that's a whole other.
It's like a drunk character. Like you can definitely go way over the top with being a drunk character, because
Right.
like the thing about drunk people is they try to not act drunk.
Yeah.
And like that's the thing about theater. It's difficult because you have to act drunk, but at the same time you have to not act drunk.
Yeah, it's the same thing with being an awkward person, which I know a lot about. It's like when you're an awkward person, you try to act not awkward, and that's
Right.
difficult sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's just like layers of acting. Like you're acting like a person who's trying not to act awkward.
Right.
Yeah, I thought that was very good.
Well, I think we're going to call that for an episode for a podcast through space and time. In space and time, my apologies. Yeah. Speaking of awkward, here's an awkward outro.
All right, see you on the other side of the vortex.
Yeah. Next time we will be watching and discussing the end of the world.